One important function of managerial accounting is computing the internal costs of providing our products or our services. Let's do an illustration. We're in a hypothetical company, Ryan Furniture Company. Ryan Company manufactures custom-made wood furniture. And I want you to think for just a moment, what does it take to make wood furniture? What do you need? Well, you need some wood, but what else do you need? So we're going to want to compute the cost of all the things required to make wood furniture. We're going to follow the flow of cost through this company. Ryan Furniture Company making custom-made wood furniture. So we're here at Ryan Furniture Company. It's August 17th. The customer comes in and orders one custom-made dining table, a beautiful piece of work made out of oak. It's about 20 feet long. They want to be able to fit a lot of people, and they want it finely honed, and maybe they want their own coat of arms carved into the top. They want a very nice table. It's August 17th, and they say, okay, I'm going around to various furniture makers, describing to them the table that I want. I need a bid. How much will you charge me to make this table for me? So, okay, if I want to make an intelligent bid, I better first figure out how much it's going to cost me to make that table. So what's it going to take to make a custom-made dining table? Well, first it's going to take the wood. In a managerial accounting setting, we call this direct materials, the actual stuff that the item is made out of. So in this case, it's wood. If I were making automobiles, it would be metal and rubber and the other things that go into making automobiles. So direct materials, that's pretty easy to estimate. You describe the size of the table and the design. It's going to use wood that costs me about $1,000. By the way, I'm not telling any of this to the customer. I'm doing this privately in a back room on a piece of paper. So direct materials about $1,000. But the wood doesn't form itself into a table. How many hours is it going to take my workers, my skilled craftspeople, to make this thing happen? Well, again, I can estimate that pretty well. It's about 30 hours. We call these people the direct labor people. They're the skilled craftspeople who actually do the work. And it's going to take them 30 hours, and I pay them a wage rate of $30 per hour. That's going to end up being $900. Okay, am I done? If I go out into the desert somewhere with a pile of wood and some workers, do I have myself a nice oak custom-made dining table? Well, no, I need some machines. And I can estimate, all right, it's going to take me about 200 machine hours to finally plane and polish and make the wood so it looks just so. So the direct materials, $1,000. Direct labor, $900. And I want to stop and make sure that you understand these two numbers are easy. Anybody who makes furniture can easily estimate the amount of direct materials, the amount of oak, in this case, that it's going to take to make this dining table, and the number of hours it's going to take their direct labor hour people, the skilled craftspeople, to do this thing. And they know how much they pay these people. So this 1,000 plus 900, that's pretty easy. But is this it? No, it can't be it. You need infrastructure, overhead, we call it. You've got to have a roof over your head. You got to have supervisors. You got to have maintenance people. You got to have quality control inspectors. You got to pay property taxes. You got to have insurance. You got to have all of this. Okay, so how much of my overhead costs? I've got my factory building here. I'm working on this oak table right here. I'm working on a children's desk over there. Other people are. I've got some bookcases going on over here. I've got a china cabinet over there. And I've got one supervisor kind of supervising all those jobs. How much of that supervisor's salary should be assigned to this oak table? How much of the property taxes on this building should be assigned to this oak table? How much of the wages that I pay to my maintenance people, how much of that should be assigned to this oak table right here? How can we do that? See, that's the hard part. The overhead is the hard part. Direct materials, direct labor, they come together. That's pretty easy to estimate. But the overhead cost, that's hard. And here's the thing to remember. Somebody's got to pay for these overhead costs. Who? Well, there are two choices. Either I build it into the cost and bill the customer for it so the customer pays, or I got to pay it myself. Well, I guess I could pay it for myself for a while, but then I'm going to go out of business. So I got to factor in how much overhead cost should be assigned to this particular dining table. Remember, the customer came in on August 17th and wants to buy this table. Well, the overhead costs, I'm really not sure, but let's go back in time. Let's go to the month before in July. Here's what I do know. Last month in July, I had total overhead costs, total, for the whole factory, $500,000. In addition, my skilled craftspeople worked 10,000 hours. And I used my machines a total of 25,000 hours. Okay, well, who cares about my direct labor people? Because they're not part of my overhead. Who cares about my machines? Well, it's this. Because I got to figure out how to assign that $500,000 total overhead. So let's think about this a little bit. Let's say I've got two projects going. I got this big, fancy dining room table made out of oak going on, and I got 15 workers gathered around doing various things. And I get a little child's desk project at the other side of the factory over there. There are two workers there working on that one. Which one of those two projects, the big dining room table project here or the little child's desk project over there, which one of those two is going to consume more overhead cost? Well, where there's more workers. So one way to think of assigning the overhead cost is just to say, okay, as a rough estimate, if you got more worker hours, you ought to be assigned more overhead. Or if we say, well, it's not worker hours, not direct labor hours, it's machine hours. The more you use the machines, the more overhead costs should be assigned. Well, that kind of makes a little bit of sense because the bigger a job is and the more involved it is, it creates more overhead cost. So that might be one way we could do this overhead. And we have to use old information. We're going back to July, but it's better than nothing. It's better than paying for the overhead cost ourselves. So let's think about this. Perhaps we could say this. Listen, last month, the way it worked was we had $500,000 in total overhead cost, 10,000 in direct labor hours, our skilled craftspeople. So it was about $50 per direct labor hour. Now let's be careful about this number 50. Because how much are we paying those direct labor hour workers? We're actually paying them a wage of $30 apiece. This is something different. Roughly speaking, for every hour one of my skilled craftspeople works on a project, a dining room table or a child's desk or a bookcase, for every one of those hours, they are consuming or requiring about $50 worth of overhead cost. The supervisor's got to come over. They're using electricity. The maintenance people have to come over. That's their share of their property taxes. About $50 per hour. It's not exact, but it's better than nothing. So that's one way that we can assign overhead to each individual project. You tell me how many direct labor hours the workers are going to work on a certain project, and I'll tell you how much overhead should be assigned to that particular project. Or maybe we'll say, no, machine hours is the right way to do it. Last month, we had $500,000 of overhead, and we used our machines a total of 25,000 hours. The more you use the machines, the more they're going to break down, the more maintenance work is going to have to happen, the more the supervisor's going to have to come over, the more electricity you're using. So maybe we can say machine hours is a better way to do this. And in that case, it'd be $20 per machine hour. If I make a plan for making this oak table and it's going to require 200 hours of machine work, well, then that's going to create $20 of overhead per every machine hour, roughly speaking, based on last month's data. Or maybe there's some combination. A little bit of the overhead maybe is more directly related to direct labor hours. Maybe that's the part about the supervisors. The more workers I've got, then the more the supervisor cost should be assigned to a project. Or maybe some of the machine hours. The more I use the machines, then the more electricity that I use, the more maintenance cost there's going to be. So some combination. This could get quite complex, but you see the basic idea. We've got to do something. The overhead cost has to be assigned to individual projects, that child's desk, that bookcase, this oak table, on some rational basis. Can we do it in proportion to the amount of skilled craftspeople hours, some proportion of the amount of machine hours? We've got to do something. Well, let's do it on the basis of direct labor hours. So direct materials, $1,000. Direct labor, $900. And overhead, well, we got 30 hours of direct labor work. And we said, roughly speaking, based on what happened last month, that it's about $50 of overhead costs are created for every hour that my workers work on a job. Remember, it's not what I pay them, but it's the amount of overhead cost that they create through doing their work. 30 hours times $50 per hour, that's another $1,500. So I could say that the total cost of this table is $3,400. Just add up the three, 1,000 plus 900 plus 1,500. Now look at those three numbers. One of them we're not really sure about. Two of them we know for sure. How about the direct materials? Yeah, you can estimate that pretty closely. How much wood are you going to use? About the direct labor, you've had some experience with your workers. You know how long it's going to take them to make a project like this. And you know how much you're paying them, $30 per hour. It's the overhead that we're not so sure about. So let's try a different way to do it. Let's assign the overhead based on machine hours, based on how much we use the machines. That's how overhead gets created. Well, the direct materials is the same, $1,000. Direct labor is the same, $900. If we base the overhead on machine hours, this particular oak table job is going to require 200 hours of using our machines. And we decided, based on data that happened last month, that we create about $20 of overhead for every hour we use our machines. So 200 machine hours times $20 of overhead created per every hour we use our machines, that's $4,000. 1,000 plus 900 plus 4,000, that's 5,900. Now stop, because you might say, well, wait a second. Why don't you just wait until the end of August so you can figure out more current data based on the August data? Well, you could do that. It would still be an estimate. Plus, you can't say to your customer, listen, I really can't tell you how much it's going to cost to make your table, and therefore I can't set a reasonable price because it's not the end of the month. You're going to have to come back at the end of the month, and then I can tell you. What's your customer going to say? Your customer says, listen, if you can't quote me a price, now I'll go to one of your competitors. This is another example of good managerial accounting being a competitive tool. If I can understand my costs well enough so that I can get an estimate of the cost of direct materials, direct labor, and overhead, bam, right now on August 17th when the customer comes in, if I can do that right now, then I can quote them a price. And that gives me a chance to get this job. Here's the problem, though. I got two different costs here, depending on how I assign the overhead. I got $3,400 and I got $5,900. Which is the right cost? What does it cost to produce this table? Is it $3,400, where we assign the overhead based on the proportion of direct labor hours, skilled craftspeople usage? Is it $5,900, where we assign the overhead based on how intensively we use the machines? Or is it something else, some combination of the two, or something else entirely? Okay, well, what difference does it make? Well, it makes a huge difference. First of all, let's say that the number is $5,900 and the customer comes in and says, I'll give you $5,000 for the table. Well, you do your calculations and you say, no, I won't accept a price of $5,000 because if I do that, I'm going to lose money. I compute my cost to be $5,900. In fact, if my cost really is $5,900, what I will suggest to the customer is, why don't you go to my competitor down the street? Because if I can get my competitor to do this job for $5,000, when I'm pretty sure that it's going to cost them $5,900 to do it, I can help drive my competitor into bankruptcy. Now, that would not be a nice thing to do, but hey, it's business. But what if, and listen to me closely, what if the real cost, what if the right way to assign overhead is by direct labor hours, suggesting that the real cost is $3,400? But I don't know that. I mistakenly think that I should be assigning overhead based on machine hours. So I mistakenly think that my cost is $5,900. Customer says, I'll pay you $5,000. Do you mistakenly think, based on your incorrect assignment of overhead cost, that, wow, it cost me $5,900 to do it. You're offering to pay me $5,000. Forget about it. But in reality, if the overhead should be assigned based on direct labor hours, the real cost is only $3,400. If you tell your customer to go away, you're sending away profit. They're willing to pay you $5,000 to give them something that only cost you $3,400 to make. So should we make this table or not? Yeah, it makes a big difference how we assign the overhead. And at what price should we sell the table? If we don't understand our costs, we don't know how to intelligently make our prices. And if we don't know how to set our prices intelligently, and our competitor down the street does know how to estimate their costs appropriately and so can set their prices appropriately, our competitor is going to beat us. Cost flows and product costing. There are three kinds of cost in a production setting. Direct materials, that's easy. Direct labor, the skilled craftspeople, that's easy. It's this overhead thing. How much overhead should be assigned to each project? That's where it gets hard. That's where the art is involved. We got to have an entire course, a series of courses, a year-long seminar on just this one thing. But you can see why it's a crucial issue.